words. Hello, Geraldo. Now, for you, now we can pick up. I know where we can pick up with you because that was we were talking about. That was your red line. Your red line was January 6th.
It has to be, Connell. It has to be. I mean, here you have a losing candidate for president of the United States refusing to acknowledge the results of an election, trying to steal an election, and using marauders and rioters to put the fear of God in Congress. To watch the congressman just there making his peace with a man who President Trump, who unleashed that terror, who ignited that riot, who tried in the most anti-democratic act in modern history to overthrow the election. I think that they're burying the lead. Yes, maybe you have some pragmatic reason to be in favor of the Republican candidate. But my goodness, if this is a question of character, then the person who unleashed that horror that you're showing on the screen right now, Connell, does not deserve your vote.
So what do you think is going on then as more and more information comes out, not only from General Kelly, who confirms or agrees with what General Milley had to say, that Trump meets the definition of being a fascist, literally. This was his chief of staff in the White House who says he was a fascist. But this article in The Atlantic is saying that he wanted Hitler's generals and just had these terrible, terrible things to say, allegedly. Trump says they're not true. His campaign says that this was never said. But The Atlantic's reporting says, you see the quote there at the bottom, it doesn't cost $60,000 to bury an effing Mexican, when he was allegedly talking about a young woman of Mexican-American descent who was a member of the military and was killed at Fort Hood. As more and more of these stories come out, it doesn't seem as if they're necessarily resonating, that the folks are for Trump or even paying any attention to them.
Well, I think the election is Trump's to lose now. I think that he's got the momentum on his side, and he's running a much slicker campaign than Kamala Harris and the Democrats. I just will say this one thing about John Kelly and this statement about suckers and losers, or the people who lose their lives serving their country. I met General Kelly and his wife Karen at Mar-a-Lago at a dinner in February 2018. The dinner, I was very honored by the president to give me a private dinner. I happened to be vacationing in the area. He invited me over along with my wife Erica. Erica refused to go because of her politics and her opposition to Trump as a politician. But I went. It was a wonderful, and I don't want to waste the audience's time talking about what I wanted to talk about was a juvenile assault weapons ban. Anyway, jump cut. After we are speaking, the president and I, in a head-to-head kind of a dinner, very intimate. I was very honored that he was giving me that kind of time and attention. Afterwards, we got up from the table, walked, and the president was saying hello to the members who dine in a kind of circular outdoor area there at Mar-a-Lago, as the president has the center table. So he went off to say hello to other guests. General Kelly and his wife Karen came up to me, shook the general's hand, of course. At a certain point, his wife, Karen, says to me, "Can you believe the way they're treating my husband?" To me, it seemed as if he was being disrespected by White House staffers and others, and she was very angry and bitter about it. Looking at that couple, I see two absolute patriots who ultimate sacrifice, their son, Robert, I think his name, first lieutenant, killed in action 2010 Afghanistan. What a burden to carry, and then to still serve as General Kelly has served the nation as the head of the Department of Homeland Security, a damn good one, and then later the longest-serving chief of staff for President Trump in his tumultuous tenure in office. I look at General Kelly, and I do not, and I would stake my life on it, believe that he is capable of telling an untruth. So if the reporter is being accurate, the reporter quotes him as saying and standing by the quote that people who lose their lives in service to the country are suckers and losers, then I believe that General Kelly believes that Donald Trump said that.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for watching. Just go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.